In this lesson, I'll guide you through how to render curves in Arnold. So in our final image, we'll be rendering all the dust as curves, and also the little fallen human hairs. So these are tiny, tiny details, and quite frankly, in the recording, we might not be able to see this very well, so I thought I would demonstrate it with something slightly more obvious. So I've butchered some curves together, and let's render these and look at the properties. The exact same technique applies to rendering the dust and the fallen human hairs. It's just better to see it this way. Okay, so over here I've got a whole bunch of curves, and in Arnold, rendering curves is as easy as selecting all of these. There we go. Go to the Arnold menu and create a curve collector. So essentially what this does is it creates some kind of set, and all these curves in this kind of Arnold set will be rendered. So we can instantly see that over here. It doesn't look that great yet because there are some options we need to take care of. First of all, let's assign a shader. So let's just go over here to the Arnold tab and create an AI standard surface shader. So for the dust, I will be using a fully diffuse non-specular shader to render the very diffuse feeling dust. For the human hairs, however, I would use the hair shader because it's designed to be used for that. So there we go. Let's change this up a little bit so we can see this better. Add in some specularity, and there we go. Here's our curves. So let's go through the settings, right? First of all, we have the mode. So Arnold has different ways of rendering curves. It's got ribbon, thick, and oriented. So ribbon, essentially this means that everywhere we look at a curve, we see the same width. So all of the segments are facing the camera, are aligned with the normals of the camera. So this is the one we'll probably end up using most. Most hair rendering is done this way, for example. Let's save this as comparison image. Then we can see what's happening in the thickness, right? So over here, it renders it as perfect cylinders. We can increase the width, and you can see what's happening. Then we have another option called oriented. This one I don't use very frequently because it's essentially the same as the ribbon mode, only the orientation is not facing the normals of the camera. So what this means is that we can see some variation in the orientation, but there's not a fantastic way to control this, or at least I know of, so I don't use this very often. I find the ribbon mode a bit more predictable and generally easier to work with. So then we have the width. So from the start to the end of the curve, you can assign a width, or you can remap this with a fractal or with a noise pattern, etc., etc. So you can control the width from start to end. Then the sample rate. This is the amount of substeps in your curve that Arnold will introduce. As you can see right now, there's just not enough. But as we increase this, the curves get represented better. Then over here we have a very important option, the minimum pixel width. So let's say we are rendering human hairs, for example, and they are very, very thin. Arnold will have a hard time sampling these. It still does a good job, but it will have a hard time sampling these. So I will quickly let this render, and then we'll have a look at this option. Okay, so we can already start seeing that the the anti-aliasing is not optimal, right? We can see some noise in it, and we can improve this pretty easily. So let's save this as a comparison image. Essentially what a minimum pixel width does is it sets the minimum width of the curves, and then it will compensate in the opacity for the thickness. So it's essentially an exchange between opacity and the thickness of the curve. And curves that are thicker with an opacity mapping, they are easier to sample. But of course, when you start layering things with opacity, the render time increases. So that's a trade-off we have to make. For this, for example, a value of, let's say, 0.4 will start clearing this up pretty nicely, I think. We do have to disable the opaqueness for this to work, because we are working with transparent objects now. Let's see how this does. Already we can start to see the difference over here in the anti-aliasing. I wonder how well this will be able to be seen on the actual recording due to the compression, but this works brilliantly. So the anti-aliasing in this render is a lot better. And once again, we've got the opaque checkbox. This is something we have discussed on the shape notes already, and then we have all the visibility checkboxes. This really is all there is to rendering curves in Arnold. It's very straightforward. It's very simple. Create the curve collector, and you're practically done.